And it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer, really, standing in a clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes, and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. Our live shows are right here at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please remember to visit the website, podcastufo.com. Check out the latest blogs and forums. And while you're there, don't forget to like our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. Sam Moranto will be joining us in a moment. We're coming at you live on the Dark Matter Radio Network, and you can catch us here every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, you can certainly call during our live show, only of course, 603-967-4030. Get a pen and a paper, 603-967-4030. Just keep in mind, when you do call, and if I answer it, you're going to be live right there, so be nice. Our guest for the show today is author and proclaimed UFO historian Richard Dolan. He'll be joining us shortly after the break. Before we get started, though, I have some sad news. One of our past guests, Lloyd Pye, has died of lymphoma cancer just 3 days ago. I just discovered recently and posted on our Facebook page the other day that Lloyd's show was the top downloaded show of all time on Podcast UFO. And we have some pretty amazing guests, so I was impressed by that. I did ask him a lot of pressing questions, but I'm not really sure if that's why or why not it was so popular. I just think he had a huge following. Regardless of any of the controversy about the Star Child skull, Lloyd was a great guy, and he will be surely missed. So here's a short clip of the show we did last February. What do you think the immediate future is for the Star Child skull at this point?
Well, it sits in a bank vault, and it waits for us to accumulate the money, to find an investor. It isn't like we're accumulating money. We're not asking for people to, donate to the cause. It's millions. It was ridiculous. That wouldn't work. I'd never get away with that. So we just keep looking for an investor. We have an investment situation here where someone puts the money up. We get the DNA recovered. We shoot a documentary film of that process. We put that film out. That film makes the money back for the investor, and hopefully everybody comes out a winner.
Too bad Rockefeller isn't still around.
Yeah,
he'd probably be interested in that. Well, thank you so much, Lloyd. It's been really fascinating, and thank you for answering all those tough questions.
Not a problem, Martin. I appreciate you giving me the platform to put my side of it out there against all those who are lined up against us, and eventually the truth will prevail. That's what keeps me going.
That's great. Great to hear. If anyone would like to listen to that interview, it is episode number 35 on our website, podcastufo.com. And Lloyd Pye, may you rest in peace. So, Sam, the comet Ison has done melted away. No comet show for us.
They're still saying there might be some debris coming in. What is it, in January?
Yeah, something like that. I think there's going to be a lot of stuff for them to study from it.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have enough going on now with all these explosions in Arizona, and we have, 2 meteor showers going on at the same time?
Yeah.
That's going to be neat.
Hey, Sam, before we bring on our guest, Richard Dolan, I wanted to talk a little bit about China's moon launch the other day. So with us in Beijing is our China UFO correspondent, Mark Sima. How are you, Mark?
This is wonderful.
Yeah, all the way in a very clear, beautiful, sunny Beijing morning.
So tell us about the moon rover launch thingy over there.
Yes, well, it happened during the nights from December 1st to December 2nd. And this time, it's not like the previous time this year. They launched during the night. So at 1 a.m. in the morning, it took off from Xichang, Sichuan province, from their launch center in the southwest of China. And the Chang'e 3 lunar probe was launched, and it has already reached the moon in the sense that it is now orbiting at 100 kilometers altitude around the moon. So it has liftoff successfully. It has managed to cross all the space between us and the moon, and it's now orbiting. And they are trying to fine-tune the orbit so they can, in a few days, they say mid-December, it should do its soft landing on the moon.
Well, now that you're mentioning soft landings, we've had some lunar rovers as historic sites there. Russia has some. And now there's a lot of controversy about how those will be protected, because I think China is expecting to have permanent moon bases by 2020. And I'm wondering if there could be a Moon War 1 over the territory up there, but it's not really supposed to be like that. Take a listen to this clip. It's from Stuart Gary's podcast Star Stuff.
Americans, and I'm sure Russians, want to preserve their historic lunar landing sites. Dr. Henry Hertzfeld, a research professor in space policy and an adjunct professor in law at George Washington University, says the proposed new legislation put before the US Congress could be seen internationally as a declaration of US sovereignty over parts of the moon.
What it was doing was trying to put the Apollo sites under the U.S. National Park Service and the Department of the Interior. The bill was somewhat careful in the way they tried to word it, but the fact is, anybody who puts something up into space owns and is responsible for what they put up there forever and with unlimited liability. But in the UN treaty that every spacefaring nation has signed, Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty, that is, says that no nation can appropriate space. Basically, that spaces and celestial bodies are places where there is no sovereignty.
That's kind of saying it the way it is, isn't it?
Well, it is, certainly. And of course, China is now a big player on every front. And what we have to hope for is that we can continue to have international space missions. But it's becoming more and more complex. So we have in one part of our sky, we have the International Space Station with so Europeans and Americans and Japanese and Russians. And then we have a new space station being constructed, one module after the other by the Chinese. And of course, we have claims into international, waters on Earth itself. And it just makes sense that every power is trying to preserve its either technological advantage and option on the future. Actually, nobody knows how it's going to play out. And you have now also a number of private consortiums who are trying to launch towards Mars. So right. Would territory be claimed by companies in the future? So it's a whole new ball game, of course.
And as far as claims go, there's helium-3, which it could be proven to be a very good energy source, and who knows how many claims there could be about that alone.
Indeed, and the Chinese have already mentioned it. So maybe at the level of scientists and university professors, but it's in the discourse. It's in actually the analysis and the reason for long-term position on the moon. So the Chinese are quite open about it, and they are saying it. There are this very rich material on the moon, and a lot of it that could be a great replacement for fossil fuel in the future.
That's right. Thank you, Mark. It's time for a break now, and hang in there. We'll be right back with Richard Dolan, and music for the show is provided for by Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse. Stay tuned. Hello, Richard Dolan. How are you?
Hello, Martin. How are you doing?
Hopefully you're still on, Sam. Now, you've been friends with Richard a long time. Isn't that right, Sam?
Yes, I think we celebrated our 10-year anniversary this year, isn't it? Something like that.
We've known each other, about 10 years. That's right.
Now, Richard, thank you for coming on the show. And you have a book out, don't you, just recently? Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I published, I have 3 books that are out. I have a 4th that'll be out this month. So I publish books by other authors as well. So I'm not really sure which one you mean. I've written 2 volumes of history called UFOs in the National Security State. Those have been out for a while. They're 500 and 600 pages respectively, so there's quite a bit of history in those. A couple of years ago, I co-authored a really interesting speculative book about the future, which we called AD After Disclosure, and that's a fun topic to talk about. Basically, that's a speculation of what would happen to the world if UFO secrecy were to end. If you believe that UFOs are real, which I do, if you believe there's a secrecy about it, which I also believe, then you might ask what happens if that ever goes away. I have a new book that's coming out. I'm just doing the final wrap-up on it now, called UFOs for the 21st Century Mind, and that's a new, fresh introduction to the entire topic of UFOs. I mean, everything that I can think about, everything most people can think about, I've tried to deal with in a clear, sort of fresh, comprehensive view of the whole topic, and I'm excited about that book.
When is it due out?
Well, I wanted it out this last fall, and before that I wanted it out this summer. I think it's going to be out in January. I've got all of the 12 chapters are finished. I've had 2 fantastic proofreaders just going over it with me, and I've got a couple of final readers who are just suggesting a few other things. And I'm wrapping it up. So I think January of 2014 is the time.
Now, Rich, you've had that the one book in the works, like you said, for some time, and I think that time may be working out to your advantage with so many other things that have been going on. You were at the conference, of course, with the congressional the
citizen hearing.
Yeah, citizen hearing.
Yeah.
So I think all this adds a little more flavor to some of the interactions you had from there, don't you think? Mm-hmm. And I'm looking forward to the book because I think it's going to be something that I know you want to do it for a while, and it really is going to stand out, especially with the timing, I think.
We have a field that has, the more I've thought about this, we're in a field that has a great need of a fresh kind of comprehensive overview. Everyone's got friends who are skeptical about this topic and wondering what all the fuss is about. So I think this would be a perfect book for that type of a person, but I also think that for ourselves, just to take a reassessment of where we are at in this field. I mean, we've had people researching the UFO topic in seriousness for about one human lifetime, really since the 1940s or 50s. And my own sense is that there have been a couple of good general attempts to encapsulate everything that has been known up to that time, but in my view, there hasn't been one in ages, and we're in a completely new era now. We're in an era of internet and Skype and Facebook and drones that are, remotely operated vehicles, and massive government secrecy and complete disbelief by most people in anything the government tells them. It's a different era now. So if you were to read a UFO generalized book about the topic from the 1980s, I think it would seem very obsolete to people of today. And so what this book is as I keep telling myself, I think it's a fresh approach. I really thought through this as well as I possibly could, and I think I'm at the best time in my life and career to do this type of an undertaking. So it's done, and I'm very excited about getting it out.
Now, I have a real interest in historical documents. It's kind of what I do for my real job, but I've always wondered, what are the earliest documents related to this subject, and what are the earliest, say, government documents that relate to the subject?
Those are 2 specific questions, because when you go back through the research of what we can say are good sightings, that goes back much farther than government U.S. government records or anything like that. Many people in this field remember the name Charles Fort. Charles Fort lived about a century ago, and he spent days and weeks and months and years at the New York Public Library just hunting for old newspaper accounts of really strange things, and he collected a lot of them. And some of these, I think, would qualify as fascinating UFO reports today, except for the fact that they're in the 18th and 19th centuries. One, for instance, of a ship out in the Mediterranean off the coast of Sicily that saw a lighted object rise from the water and then fly off. 1845. There's quite a few of these types of things, and it's not that none of them have naturalistic explanations, but some of them seem like a bit of a stretch for a naturalistic explanation. In terms of government data, really the earliest that I am aware of would be U.S. military Foo Fighter reports. Now, that's from World War II.
Right.
And those are confirmed. There are unconfirmed, let's say, debated documents that are a little bit earlier than that. They may be legit. A lot of people debating their authenticity. These are the so-called Majestic documents, and some of those go back I don't know if any of them go back to the 30s, certainly the early 40s. I don't have any copy of a government record from any government that goes back prior to that, although we do know there were really what we would call UFOs today, like back in the 30s over Sweden. There were mystery craft that were flying over that country. They didn't really seem to behave like UFOs, but they were mysterious. No one knew what they were. I haven't seen the Swedish government records on that. I mean, basically, we're talking 1940s onward.
That's too early for the ghost rockets, isn't it?
No, that's after World War II. The ghost rockets were 1946, but actually back in the early 30s, 1933, 34, there were these mystery flyers. I don't know a whole lot about them. I think Tim Good wrote about them in Above Top Secret, and they may have been written about elsewhere. My guess is that there's probably government records of that somewhere, but but I haven't seen those.
In the book that Dave wrote here, Triangular UFOs, he's got a few cases into the 30s. I know personally myself.
David Marler.
Dave Marler. On Triangular UFOs, an estimate of the situation, and that is published by yourself there, Richard. And he went into a case in the Yukon in 1930s of a triangular UFO, and this is what I find interesting.
You're talking about Dave Marler's account in his book, Triangular UFOs, of an account in Yukon in the 1930s, and then I lost you.
Yeah, well, the thing is, the triangular UFO craft or triangular objects, whatever, they're not something confined to any time frame where a lot of people feel that this was just some phenomena that just took place during or after the Belgian waves in the 1980s.
Right. Yeah.
And here we have wood carvings back in the 1500s of triangular type objects seen in Europe and Nuremberg, and these have been reported before. I have read an account from 1890 something in a log, a ship's log of a triangular craft being seen near the flying in front of the moon, and then there was an almanac writing back in the 1900s. So triangular type shaped shapes, I think when it falls more into line is many a time people think along to what they expect to see or what other people are seeing. And if it's so far out of what people are talking about, it's bad enough they're reporting something weird, but something so far-fetched, they don't even want to bring it into the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Sam. The thing with the triangular UFOs is, as you point out, they have been seen and recorded pretty in more detail than people would realize. In Dave's book, I think it goes back he has good reports going back to the 1940s, and I think he's got some going back to the 30s, and then, lesser certain stories going back to the 19th century, but they do, some of them seem pretty interesting indeed. So I totally agree. The problem you find with the UFO topic, at least with some people who analyze it, is everyone, if you're a carpenter, then every problem is solved with a hammer. So whatever someone's specialty is, they assume that that's how they explain all UFOs. And in fact, this is a really complicated subject. So you get some aviation expert people and they'll say, oh no, well, the triangular UFOs were obviously making them all. Well, that's fine, except those people invariably ignore these early reports. You talked about the Belgian wave, and what you're referring to is a bunch of sightings in Belgium in 1989 and 1990. They're very well documented, of perfectly triangular objects that did all the things that classical UFOs do. That is, hover silently, quick acceleration, non-inertial movements, all of that. So you could argue that, yes, we're making triangular craft. I think that we are also, frankly. But the question is, who was making them in 1940 or in the 1930s?
And that's the point. The point is
right.
People want to just blur the timeline. And this is in fact, this is something with, like you say, even within our field, some people want to keep the 1947 everything happened with right when, Kenneth Arnold seemed the first one, that's it.
Right.
And the so-called skeptics, that's it, 1947. Though we have people, like I say, in our own field that use, it's 1947 and that was it. And no, that isn't the case.
No, there's some great, actually a couple of very well attested sightings. One from 1904. Wish I had it right in front of me, but my memory is pretty good on it. It was U.S. naval vessel out in, I'm sure this was the Atlantic, and a lot of the crew members, including the commander or captain of the ship, saw 3 objects zooming in and then curving, going back up away. And it blew them all away. The commander of that ship later became a very important battle commander of one of the world wars. Can't remember, maybe both. But the point is, it was a very well attested sighting. And you get a number of, and that's early. It's way before Kenneth Arnold. The problem was we didn't really have a consciousness of UFOs at that time. And so there were quite a few sightings in those early decades of the 20th century. They just kind of got lost in the shuffle of everything else that was happening, and people just shrugged their shoulders and said, who knows? It was only after 1947 that we focused.
You brought up a good point about the water. And Mark Rodiger from CUFOS, the scientific director of CUFOS, he points out one thing about UFOs. What type of object is it that we have? And actually, you're pointing back from 1909 or 1904, something like that?
04, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, what did we have that could go in the water and come out and fly and do all these different maneuvers without wings, etc., and still to this day,
clearly nothing then and nothing today officially.
Nothing today
that can come out of the water and then fly off.
Yeah, and Rodiger says, Sam, if anything you were to point out to people, point out that whatever these things are able to go in water and go into the air, and it seems they exhibit the same amount of speed, so evidently they're working on principles we can't incorporate into anything conventional or anything that we exhibit right now. So I think that adds a lot of merit or value to the UFO phenomena as being something outside of the scope of something in our arsenal.
Richard, I'd like to talk to you about MJ-12. There's a lot of controversy about it, and I'm totally confused about it, actually, and I wondered if you could enlighten us on that subject.
I'd be very happy to. And actually, after we get into that, I don't know if you wanted to talk about any confirmed U.S. government documents, UFO phenomenon. I'm always happy to discuss that. In fact, that's a good way to give a background to MJ-12. What really happened is that for decades and decades and decades, but in the 40s and 50s and 60s, and through most of the 70s, if you were a UFO researcher and you were convinced that the U.S. government had information about UFOs, you really couldn't prove anything. Government could just say, what? No, we don't. We have nothing about that. What are you talking about? And in the mid-1970s, our nation was strengthened its Freedom of Information Act laws. And as a direct result of that, by the late 1970s, UFO researchers were actually about at the forefront of FOIA, petitioning the U.S. government and many branches of the military and the FBI and the CIA for documents pertaining to UFOs. And guess what? They started getting hundreds and then thousands of pages of documents confirmed from the U.S. National Archives about UFOs. And some of these are pretty hot stuff, and I can talk about those in a minute. So that started this whole cascading effect, because what people started to realize is that, oh my God, the government really has been lying about this. I mean, they're talking about violations of sensitive airspace by objects that were not supposed to exist. They were telling us all these years there's nothing to it. And here they are issuing emergency memos about UFOs over sensitive airspace. What's up with that? So people were really keying in on this. So that was a problem. And another problem at the same time, late 1970s, was really the second prong in the attack on secrecy, which was stories began leaking out of crashed UFOs that were being retrieved. Now, these were not official government documents, but these were pretty interesting leaks. One of those stories was about Roswell, but that was by no means the only story. In other words, by the late 70s, you've got all of these documents that are coming out of the Freedom of Information Act tree. You shake the tree and here come more documents. That's one. And then the other were all of these leaks, but pretty interesting leaks about crash UFOs. And my goodness, if you were trying to manage all of this secrecy, you might be thinking, what has just happened in a couple of years? All of this is really going to destabilize our situation. Now, with that as the background, in the early 1980s, you have a number of connections. You have another groups in the intelligence community start nosing their way into the UFO field. I think they've been there all along. But in this case, you have Air Force intelligence specialist Richard Dolan at Kirtland Air Force Base at the time, showing unprovable but interesting documents to the researcher Linda Moulton Howe back in 1983. These are documents that pretty heavy-duty stuff, like presidential briefing documents about crash UFOs and dead aliens and the like. And she's like, what? Right? She sits on it. She doesn't do anything with it. And then a year and a half later, more leaked documents come out to the UFO researcher William Moore and his associate Jamie Chandray. Both of those guys have intelligence community backgrounds.
Right.
They receive a film canister. This is old, Kodak film days, not digital. And they have it developed, and it shows 8 pages of documents. And it sure looks like an amazing presidential briefing document dealing with crash UFOs, the reality of the UFO phenomenon, an executive order signed by Harry Truman. I mean, all of this stuff. And that's the MJ-12 documents, because it refers to a group called MJ-12, which was charged with managing the whole UFO secret. Ever since, this is 1984 when this, and they broke in 87. Ever since then, now it's been almost 30 years, and people have been at each other's throats over the MJ-12 documents. You've had people making cases for it. You have people making cases against it. And it didn't end there, because by the early and mid-1990s, a whole new array of documents, hundreds of pages of them, not just 7 or 8, began to be released. And these are not film photographic negatives. These are actual original paper. And they are in the, they were analyzed and in the possession of Dr. Bob Wood and his son Ryan Wood, and I know both of those guys very well. And those are called the Majestic documents. And people can look up the Majestic documents online at majesticdocuments.com. A lot of analysis on these.
Have you actually seen these and held these in your hand in person?
I've not held them in my hand. I've studied. I have a printout of every single one of them, and I've bound them in my own book. Gone through them and through them. I do know the analysis. I mean, I've talked at length to Bob and Ryan about the paper and the analysis that had been done by on the typeface of the various documents and so forth. So it's all quite fascinating. So these are the Majestic documents in a nutshell. And my basic down and dirty take on them is they they look really good. When people call them crude fakes, they're full of it. They're not crude. If these are hoaxes, these are absolute masterpieces, better than the Hitler diaries. They are top-notch. That's my own view. And I had a long discussion, by the way, with a very, very seasoned PhD in the intelligence community about these. And this is a number of years ago. I said, here's my take on it. If these, no matter how you look at the Majestic documents, they are some kind of evidence for the reality of this phenomenon, because if they're real, then it's self-evident. If they're fake, who's faking these? This could not possibly be made by like one guy cranking them out in his basement. You'd have to have an IQ of 250 or more. Basically, they could only be faked by a large team of PhDs, in my opinion, who have absolute expert knowledge of every single government format, military format, through the periods in question, detailed history knowledge of the entire period, sophisticated, complete detailed knowledge of the language, the terminology, all of the idioms, everything. This is high-level sophistication. So this is not done by just some guy who's trying to blow smoke at us for fun. These would be a formal, sophisticated act of disinformation. And my question to this individual was, who's going to be doing it? It's got to be coming out of the U.S. intelligence community if it's fake. And he said, absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. If they are fake, they are U.S. government bona fide fakes.
Can you remind us again where you can find these online, please?
MajesticDocuments.com. That's the website of Bob and Ryan Wood. They've run that site for quite some time. And they do a good job with it. So they've got it organized beautifully. MajesticDocuments.com. You can go by decade, and they have all of the documents there. You can click them, enlarge them. They have very, very, I think, good analysis of each one. You can kind of read about them all. And they'll tell you why they think this is legit, or this has a higher degree of legitimacy maybe than the average, and so on. I think they make a good case. When I first broke into this field back in 2000, 2001, I was in mortal terror of those documents. I knew about them. Hadn't read them. I was afraid to read them. I thought, oh, God, here's just another thing to do. And one day I just bit the bullet, and I went to their website, and I printed every single one off. I bound them in a big fat notebook, and I just read them through in chronological order. And I will never forget the feeling of having mind equals blown by going through all of them. It's an awesome experience it's very easy for an armchair skeptic to say, oh yeah, it's all fake. There's of no known provenance, which is not exactly true. Actually, they do have a provenance, which they discuss on their website. A fellow named Cooper, what's his first name? Thomas. God, what's wrong with me? Anyway, it's all there, and they describe how they get the documents and so forth. But it's easy to dismiss them. But I notice when people dismiss them, they usually haven't read more than like 2 paragraphs of 500 pages worth of stuff. So, what I tell the people is read them, really read them, and then tell me that they're BS. I'd like to hear that, and then tell me why.
Yeah, I remember Stan Friedman said he had a running bet with someone on these documents. Who was that? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah, you're talking Stan Friedman and Philip J. Klass, who's now deceased.
That's right.
That's right. Now, that was a different one. They were talking about they were arguing over some of the MJ-12 styles. There's a big argument over the original documents over the date style was wrong, supposedly.
That's right.
And the dating style was, it is unusual, and it's not standard military. It's like standard military would be like 13 September 1954 without commas or anything like that. And there were documents there that were 13 September, comma, 1954, which that's not standard. And Klass said, that's totally wrong. And Kevin Randall would say, that's totally wrong, and other researchers. And Klass pointed that out, and Klass pointed out a couple of other things about typeface and so forth about these documents. And he said, I'll give you $100, is it $100 or $1,000? $100 up to $1,000, I think it is.
That's
for
right.
every document you can find that has this style. And Stan went into the National Archives and found more than 10. He found a whole bunch, but Class paid him $1,000.
I think he published the check in his book, too.
He did, and Class was furious. He did not want that out. But Stan said, hey, screw it, man. I won my money. It's my check. I own it. I can do what I want with it. And
That's
he
right.
embarrassed
Even
Class.
cash it, maybe.
That's right. Well, I hope he cashed it.
I think he did.
Indeed. So,
Better
yeah,
off.
let's a little bit about the Majestic documents, though. It's one of these things where one of many minefields of the UFO topic. That's the thing about this phenomenon. Nothing is easy when you study UFOs. Nothing is easy. The topic itself is inherently difficult, because I think what we're doing is we're bumping into something that's really at the edge of what our minds are able to comprehend. We're dealing with a reality that is at the limits of what we understand about space and time and what we understand about ourselves and what we understand about consciousness and technology and who knows what else. It would be like having your dog try to understand what you do when you go to work. You could try to explain it, but you wouldn't get a lot of success. And we might be in a situation like that where we just can't get it. So that's one problem. And another problem is there is a genuine amount of secrecy that is on this topic, so that ordinary citizens like ourselves are indeed hampered at getting at information. That's just the name of the game. We know this. There's no way of even arguing. We know that the topic was classified at the level of top secret. We got lucky. We have a couple of declassified documents that state this explicitly. And yet what's interesting is that all of all the declassified documents we've gotten over the years, 10, 12,000 pages by now on UFOs, the smallest handful only were of top secret. Most are of lower levels of secrecy. So in other words, the good stuff is still being withheld.
And you mentioned before, we've heard before that at least half of current government documents are being kept from Bay and not allowed even for FOIAs.
We're in an era of absolute overwhelming government opaqueness and secrecy. And the statement I got out of a very good study of America's black budget and secret military world called Blank Spots on the Map by a researcher named Trevor Paglen. It's a very good book. And that was his best estimate. No one really knows for sure, but what he estimated, and I think he had good reason for this, was that roughly, he said 50% of all U.S. government documents, are classified in one way or another. So that, in other words, if you're an archivist or a historian of the United States government, you could legitimately argue that half of all of your government's activity is secret. I don't think Paglen knows. I don't think anybody truly knows what percentage of government documents are secret. But that was his best guess. And in his book, which I read and enjoyed very much, I felt he made a very strong case as to the extent of secrecy.
Sure, but when you have that much being kept from the public, what we're left with is really a fiction that could be. You're taking points of facts and you're making the bridge whatever you want it to be. It could be all fiction. So we don't have a real history anymore.
The problem that we have,
I don't know if we ever did. I don't know.
Right. Well, in our society, our government, the Americans, let's just talk about Americans for the moment. We've had a history in which we prided ourselves of being the citizens, being the sovereign entities of the country, so that we have a system. We have Congress. We elect our members of Congress, and they respond to us. And so there's this pretense that if there's something happening that's important, the citizens inherently will find out. We have a watchdog media, we're told, and we have representatives that answer to us. And that's kind of the assumption that in the back of our minds we like to think about. I like to think that. The reality is very different, and the reality is that through the course of the 20th century, by degrees, and then, of course, every time you have a big war, it just advances by leaps and bounds, we've had the development of what I've come to call a national security state. And you can call it a lot of things. You can call it a homeland security state. You can call it a surveillance state. You can call it a big brother state. But what it has done is it has kind of grown. You know, like in the first movie Alien, where the alien creature like is inside your body and it explodes out of your body.
Yeah.
That's what's happened. So the good old American Republic is this dead corpse, and inside it has grown this alien body that's kind of come out. And that's the national security state. And it's kind of taken over. So, but the problem is we haven't really had an official recognition. We haven't had a proper funeral for the old-fashioned republic. So we kind of have this fiction that is still around. But really, we've lost control. And so it matters, because if you're trying to get to the bottom of UFO secrecy, it matters what kind of government you have. It matters if you have a democracy, republic, or some form of authoritarian system. It matters a great deal. And we've really gone through this transformation. So getting the information out, it's not a slam dunk. You have these there are intelligent skeptics, and then there are really ignorant skeptics, and they have this idea that, oh, well, you can't keep this secret. I mean, they're not that good. They're not that competent. They're not able to. Wrong. Secrecy is a way of life, and has become a way of life within the United States national security complex.
Sometime earlier in the year, you had an interview that went viral, and it was a deathbed testimony. And do you mind if we talk about that?
Oh, golly, yeah, sure. This was something that aired during the citizen hearing in Washington, D.C. in, I guess, in early May of this year. It was an interview that I conducted with a gentleman in, I guess it was February of 2013. And I've been telling people the general location. It was in northern Minnesota. I was asked to do this interview by my friend and colleague Stephen Bassett, who knew about it, and there was a small production crew that accompanied me. And they told me all about this fellow. I didn't know anything about him. He was and is not well. He's still alive. I wasn't, when I met him in February, I wasn't expecting that he would live this long, to be perfectly honest with you. But a lot of people listening have probably seen the video, and it's on YouTube. It's gotten a lot of views. And essentially, he had a story about having been in the U.S. Army intelligence in the late 50s and being recruited by the CIA. And he was recruited, he said, to basically accept UFO reports that were coming in from Europe through the CIA. And then he made an even more amazing statement that he and his boss primarily were tasked by U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower to take a trip to Area 51. The reason was that, as he said, Eisenhower was trying and failing to get information relating to the UFO ET phenomenon, which he knew was at Area 51. He had been essentially stonewalled, he said. And he told these two, he said, look, I've been trying and trying for years and I haven't gotten anything. If you two are not able to get me a reasonable amount of intelligence, then I'm going to send, he said, apparently I will send the First Army in and invade Area 51. That's apparently when this man said this to me, I'm sure my eyebrows shot way up into my forehead. And he had a lot more to say. And, you know, you can listen to it on YouTube. It's 18 minutes long. Here's the thing. I've had people writing to me ever since that. And I've had military people writing to me saying, that is such a crock. The way he speaks isn't right. Nothing's right. Everything is wrong. I've had other people write to me, some of them military also, who said, no, he actually seems like he could be legit. I do have a copy of his military papers, his DD-214. I do know he was in the U.S. Army. I know his real name. I know his son-in-law. I spoke at length to his son-in-law, who knows the whole story. They're very close. I know what church this man has gone to. He's a sweetheart of a guy, and I loved him. When I was with him, actually, I talked with him for 2 days, and he is absolutely a genuine man, in my opinion. He did. Now, having said that, I will not vouch 100% for the veracity or accuracy of what he said to me. And the reason is twofold. It's not that he's a liar. He's in his mid-late 70s. His health was awful. He was on meds. He was in physical pain, and he was foggy. His mind truly was foggy. There were a lot of things he couldn't remember. He couldn't remember the name of J. Edgar Hoover. He couldn't remember a number of things which I felt he mispronounced and got wrong. And I do leave open the possibility that there may have been a level, not a complete amount, but some confabulation is always a possibility. What is confabulation? It means when you tell something that you think is true, but you got it wrong. Human memory is fallible. Mm-hmm. And if we forget that, then we're being very silly, because all of us, we've convinced ourselves of things that may not have actually happened. I don't know in this man's case. For me to do follow-up research is very difficult, because how are you going to get information in the archives about a trip to Area 51 to find out about the truth of ETs or not? I mean, that's not going to be a FOIA request, I can tell you right now. Now, there may be people who come out of the woodwork who have something tangible to say that might support this guy.
I actually have an email from a former FBI agent, and he gave me quite a list here. Do you mind if I read some of it to you?
Yeah, I would love to hear it.
Well, first of all, he talked about using the swipe card, the security swipe card 1958, to get into secure areas. And from this guy's quick research into the subject, it appears the idea of magnetic swipe cards was only just beginning to be developed in 1960. It wasn't until 1969 where IBM first started making them available commercially and for many uses by the government. Secondly, he gave his account of the Men in Black, and this guy didn't feel that he gave a reasonable explanation as to why he was afraid to keep talking to Linda Howe after the incident. Plus, he feels that could have easily been fabricated. He clearly said that he wanted to remain anonymous, and yet he had his face showing during the interview in full lighting. And he ends with this: the bottom line, I feel neutral about the interview at best. I'd like it to be true, but if he truly wants people to know the truth, his name and credentials need to be vetted, and a very lengthy interview off the beaten path of questions needs to be attempted. Then we might be getting somewhere.
I wonder if this guy wrote to me as well, because some of this, I mean, I went through this with other people about the magnetic swipe card as well. That I'm not really worried about. We're talking about 1 or 2 years. It's very possible. It's entirely possible that within the classified, black budget world, we're not talking FBI, we're talking beyond that certain technologies could have easily been online even before the FBI was getting them. So that actually bothers me not at all. That I don't even consider. The other thing he talked about, what was the other? Swiping card, and then, the First Army. Yeah, I don't really know. I'm not sure if that's true or not. And I'm not really sure if any of us really knows, just because some guy says it's the case. That fact needs to be checked, honestly.
Right.
And it's also possible, though, that he's right and that the old man got it wrong, or he might have remembered something wrong. It's entirely possible. The thing about memory is you can remember certain generalities correctly, and you may get certain specifics wrong. It's entirely possible. And, you go through life, you go through year after year, and you convince yourself that, it was the First Army. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I don't know.
In the beginning, did he not want his face shown, and you talked him into it?
No, the reason, when we were coming to interview him, we actually didn't know if we'd get to interview him until the very last minute. The only reason he agreed to do this, and this is where I'm glad you mentioned this, because the correspondent, your correspondent, I think really doesn't have a genuine appreciation of just this whole situation. The guy did interview with Linda Moulton Howe about 15 years ago, and he did a very lengthy interview with her, which she had on the Art Bell Show. And it's got to be somewhere in the archives. I'm trying to get Linda to have that whole thing made public, and right now it's on her Earth Files archives. I'd like it to be a little bit more available. The point is, what he said in that interview was generally quite consistent with what he said to me. That I know. And what he then claimed is that after he went public with Linda, he got a visit from the Men in Black and was frightened away. And now what this writer is, this correspondent of yours is saying, well, if he's afraid then, why is he talking to me? The reason he was talking to me is he's said flat out that he's dying. He doesn't expect to live much longer. Mm-hmm. And he was talked into it. There was a particular researcher, I'll just give his name, Ron Garner, who worked this guy. After Linda went away and after no one else talked to him, Ron Garner did. And he cultivated this man for years. And this guy basically was just going to drop off the face of the earth. He wasn't going to talk to anybody. And Ron persuaded him after, a lengthy conversation to say, look, let's just get you on camera one last time. Just one time before you go. And the guy said, okay. And that really was what it was. And while we were going up to see him, we actually did not have a hard and fast yes. We had all flown up there. That's right. We flew into Minneapolis and we were taking this long drive up the state in the snow, hours, and really with no clear idea if we were going to even get to talk to him.
Wow.
And because of his health and because some members of his family were not into it, we didn't know if he was into it.
So did you just meet somewhere?
Yeah, hotel. Motel.
Yeah.
A little tiny little motel. Very nondescript little place. He had to be brought in on a wheelchair by his son-in-law. And, I have to tell you, when I met this man, when you meet him, if you ever got to meet him, it's very hard not to like this man. And I tried not to let my emotional reaction get in the way of interviewing him, but it was impossible not to like him. And, it was clear that there were times I'd interview him. He started coughing. I thought, my God, he's going to die right in front of me. I was that concerned for him. But he kept in good spirits the whole time. He was a real trooper. There's a lot of interview that I did with him. Not all of it was on YouTube. And a lot of it's redundant and not all of it's really relevant. I think that the producers of this are trying to put together a DVD, and I think they want to get more of his testimony out there.
How long did you actually interview him on film?
I don't know. I was with him for about 5 hours. I don't know how much of that we were being recorded, but I was over 2 days, a couple of afternoons. And there were a couple of things that he said regarding CIA. I'll just say this: CIA assassination teams, which he had some knowledge about, including where they were based, and he would not. This is very interesting. He absolutely would not state where those bases were, although he gave hints, I guess I could say. But he was adamant that he was not going to give away the names and locations of those bases. But these were places in the U.S. where CIA was involved in training, top-level assassins for work in and beyond the U.S.
Wow.
Yeah. And that did not go on the YouTube video, clearly. but that wasn't something that he did during the formal interview. That was literally something that was off camera, and he talked about very quietly. And this is the first time I'm mentioning it, and I don't mind that I'm mentioning it at this point. I think I'm happy to repeat that. His way of telling me that and a number of other things, again, everything he said to me struck me as quite genuine. Having said all of that, I can't prove that this is true either. A good story is a good story, but it's not the same as having corroboration or confirmation from other sources. So right now, as Stanton Friedman would say, let's put it in our gray basket.
Now, did Linda Moulton Howe not want to get involved this time in any of this? And if so, how come?
I don't know the details of how or why she wasn't involved with it. Linda, I know, is very busy, and I can say I'm very good friends with her, but I wasn't involved in talking with her about this particular case beforehand. I've spoke with her at length after the fact. I conferred with Linda, and I conferred with Ron Garner and a number of other people involved in shooting it. We had a number of conversations about this man. Suffice to say, most of us think that he's truthful, but no one is willing to say that he's absolutely correct. I don't think anyone thinks that he's lying. Mm-hmm. In fact, I know that of those of us who've really studied this, I don't think any of us think he's a liar. We've gone back and forth from saying he's either truthful and he's nailed it, or if he got one or two things wrong, that might just be his memory acting up on him.
You know what I found interesting in your interview with him? He doesn't really overstate himself. He seems real a matter of fact, and he's the way he explains each position and where he was and how he got into the next mode of getting into that final position makes a lot of sense, and it's never overstated.
I thought the same thing, Sam. I thought he was very, actually, for as wild as the story is, and let's just put that right out there, and things he said were pretty, he said he was brought to a room where there was a live ET on the other side of a glass that he felt telepathically in his head. And the one statement he heard that heard it say was, "We mean you no harm." That's what he said he heard in his mind. Now, I'll just say this. You get a lot of stories of alleged telepathic communication between us and them. This is common.
Right.
So here he's got his own version, except that there's a live EBE there. That's not the only such story, by the way, of people seeing ETs behind a glass wall in a military facility. These have been out there. I've come across a couple myself. Did he steal it from somewhere else, or is this symptomatic that this is a thing, that there are glass walls and people see, extraterrestrial beings behind them? Don't know, but he was. I think, Sam, I agree with you. He was very deliberate about just about every little thing he described, and
I was blown over, to tell you the truth. I was just I was looking at your expression at different points when it was being shot, and I think a few things that really nailed you, like you say, the talking to the alien, or at least telepathically. The other thing that you really got, your expression was, seemed to have an expression afterwards, was the calling the First Army. And I had looked into the location of where they were located during that period of time. I think they got to Fort Collins after that period of time. They may have been the Springs. There may have been a unit there. I'm not sure if the First Army was there, but something like that. But they were there. I just don't know time period wise.
Yeah, and there were a couple of things on the chronology. If I had had a lot, I truly wish that I had had a lot of prep time to interview, prep interviews of this man before we did the filming. Because what I would have liked to have done, when you interview someone, what you want to do is you want to take notes and you want to put together a detailed chronology of events based on what they tell you. And then what you want to do as a good interviewer is working off of that chronology, you ask the person about events, but in all different types of order. And this is a very widely used way in law enforcement to trip liars up. Because if you're a really good liar, and unless you're like a superb liar, you're going to have a hard time, unless you've worked over your story over and over again, you're going to have a hard time remembering it in every single exact order, especially if you have to give it out of order.
Yeah.
I mean, now, if it's a true story, then you can do it because you know it. If you're making it up, it's a little bit harder. And I would like to have done that with this man. I just didn't have enough. I didn't have the opportunity. It's just, you really need more time with these things. And I mean, I'm satisfied as far as it goes with the interview. I think it was good that he got a chance to talk. I don't think that it's, I don't think he's offering us a pile of magic beans here. I think that there's something to it. And I think it's going to be up to us to look into it. Some of the criticisms, again, that Martin, that were that your correspondent talked about, the magnetic swipe card.
Yes,
doesn't really do a lot for me. There's a long history of technology that is way ahead, particularly with this area, with the Area 51 area, and going out to like Edwards Air Force Base and that whole region. I know story after story after story that have come to me personally and come to other researchers by military people. They're almost laughing, saying, "Are you kidding? We're decades ahead of you guys." Sure. So magnetic swipe, it's a couple of years. It doesn't do anything. Anyway, it's a fascinating thing, and I almost didn't want to do it. The interview. I just thought if this turns out to be a big mess, it's going to come blowing up right on my face. Right. And
how many times have we seen that happen, right?
Well, right, exactly. But I did it because I trusted my friend Stephen Bassett, and I did him a favor, and he asked me to do it, and I said I would do it.
Can you talk about that book you mentioned earlier? Because this has always been really fascinating to me. Was it The Day After Disclosure or something like that?
AD After Disclosure.
It's always interesting to theorize how people would react to something like that. How did you come up with some of the ideas? And let's talk a little bit about it.
Well, thanks for asking. The idea of disclosure has been one of those percolating, brewing ideas for the 21st century. Back in the last few decades of the 20th century, there were researchers who were trying to get the end of secrecy, trying to get a government admission, but really it just wasn't happening. And when you go back over that period of research, what you really find is that no one was really asking any question beyond, we need to end secrecy on UFOs. And through the first decade of the 21st century, it's really more of the same. You get, folks like Dr. Stephen Greer has his press conference in 2001. A number of other people start talking about disclosure. I was dragged into the disclosure discussion. I didn't start out wanting to talk about that. I was talking about government secrecy. I said disclosure is very premature. But I got roped in. Conference after conference, people would ask me about it, and I started thinking about it, really. And it was around 2008, 2009 that I started really thinking about disclosure. A few people asked me some pointed questions at conferences. Like one person asked, if you were the president, how would you go about the process? And I thought, wow, that's a really good question. And it occurred to me that really no one was asking or answering these types of questions. We all talked about, it would be great to have the end of secrecy, but what would happen? And it so happened that I struck up a friendship at around that time with Bryce Zabel, who's a Hollywood film director and TV producer. He did the TV show Dark Skies back in the 1990s, and he's done work for Steven Spielberg and other people. And Bryce and I just started chatting, and we had a bunch of conversations. And by the spring of 2010, we both realized because he has the same interests I had, we thought we could do a good book on this. And we mapped it out. I mapped it out primarily, and we set up a game plan, and we wrote this book. Basically, what we did is two fundamental questions. One is, given that UFO secrecy has been with us since forever, what even makes us think that there will ever be an end to secrecy? I mean, there are people who say it's impossible. They've been keeping the secret forever. Why do you think it'll end? Well, I have an answer to that one. And then the second question, the fundamental question is, if that secret ends, what then? And the what then is really the wild ride of this book. I mean, we try to look at everything the way a think tank would look at it. That is, the immediate political reaction in the U.S., particularly with U.S. focus in this case, but then economic impact, financial markets, cultural revolution, religious implications, scientific implications, and then really finally long-term geopolitical global reconfiguration based on this. And all of which, included some analysis or speculation on who exactly are we dealing with anyway? What are these other beings? And a lot of it's contingent, of course, on what we might find out and how we might find it out. And there's a whole bunch of variables we'll never know. Sure. But what we realized is that there are a couple of things that we felt reasonably confident are going to shake out. One, to answer the very first question, like what makes me think that there'll even be a disclosure? One thing you have to keep in mind is I have never seen and don't see disclosure as this nice, gift given by the U.S. president to the people of the world. Like, okay, I'm now going to tell you. Here it is, people.
Yeah, we need a mass sighting or something like that.
Right, that's never going to happen. I think the only way disclosure is going to happen is when they are pressed to the wall. Mass sighting or a WikiLeaks type of event, something comes out that forces their hand. And then they'll say, oh, God, okay. And then they'll make a statement. And then, of course, what you have to expect is spin, and more spin, and lies, and delays, and deception. So it's not like, just because the CIA has been outed on this that they're not going to walk away from the table and say, okay, we'll tell you everything. They've invested a lot of time in managing and controlling this information, so they're not just going to give up just because of this little thing called disclosure. The big thing about disclosure is that not that we're going to get all of the truth, but the big thing about disclosure is that it will put this topic on the table in a public way so that everyone can talk about it, so that everyone can investigate it. And in other words, it's the beginning of a new phase in the battle over truth. It's not the end of anything. It's the beginning of a new phase. So that's disclosure. And then, the ramifications after that are just going to be, I think it's going to rock our world. And I do think it's going to happen. I think it's inevitable because we're in just such a revolutionary period of human history. Look where we've come in the last 50 years, let alone 100. We are not recognizable, and clearly we're not going to be standing still.
That's right.
So we're developing new ways of communicating globally, of obtaining new information. WikiLeaks is a symptom of what's happening. The group Anonymous is symptomatic of what's happening. You can't plug up all the leaks in the dike. There's just too many. And here comes the ocean. It's just going to overwhelm that wall of secrecy. So whether it's 10 years or 20 years, I don't know, but I think it will happen. And when it does, it's going to bring a lot of uncomfortable questions. I'd hate to be the president of the United States.
There'd be a lot to answer for, that's for sure.
Absolutely. How do you tell the world that you've been lying, that your national security apparatus has lied for them for the last 70 plus years? How do you tell the world the actual structure of the secrecy that has been privatized, which everyone's going to know? How do you tell the world that you've got all of this fancy technology you've been hiding from them? You've been holding their future hostage.
Right.
There'll be a lot of other questions that'll come on the table, and it'll be very difficult, I think, to withstand scrutiny into all of them. So it's going to, open up a big can of whoop ass on the national security apparatus. Now, whether that means it'll be a revolution or not, only time will tell. But hey, we remember Occupy Wall Street. Well, just imagine if there's an Occupy Area 51. Is it impossible? No, it's not impossible. Of course not. Wackenhut can keep 10, 20 people out with their machine guns, but they're not going to keep out 10,000 or 20,000 or 200,000 people if that were to happen.
You sure would be getting some press if that was happening.
Yeah. So
they would put them
lots
first.
Of things can happen. Lots can happen.
Have them go first with the cameras.
Come on, shoot down the cameraman, Sam.
Got a few I could put out there and recommend,
Yeah.
On the subject of media and honesty in the media, something that we're well accustomed to seeing, the games being played with interviews. How do you think? Now you're in Europe a lot, and you've been to Leeds. How many times now? 4 or 5 times?
Yeah, something like that. There's the annual Exopolitics conference there, and I think I've been there 4 or 5 times, something like that.
Now Britain's pretty much the same way as the United States, as being pretty tough on this subject and more ridicule and sarcasm than anything else. But
yeah, I think so.
Now, where are you seeing? Because I know you've been to a few other countries this last year, and where are you seeing some promise as far as this information coming out to the public in a very earnest manner?
Oh, good question. Well, this is still a ghettoized topic no matter where I've gone around Europe. I've spent time in Britain. I was up in Norway a couple of times in the last year or two. I was in Denmark and Copenhagen not long ago. About a year ago, I was in I've done this in Italy and in France, and I was in Spain, although I wasn't in Spain for a conference. All of this in the last recent period of time. And in Amsterdam, I was there. I think this is a topic that's basically in the ghetto everywhere. There are definitely... There's a strong contingent of alternative researchers that are out there that are working the turf and that are trying to build this up. But I don't want to deceive myself into thinking that we're getting a big grassroots movement going. I'm not seeing – what I see is a lot of widespread general kind of mild interest. And I see that here in the U.S. and I see that elsewhere. So it's not like people are just like, UFOs, that's stupid. No, I don't think we see that. But it's not like a UFO movement has grabbed the imagination of, the common man and woman out there. I think it's more like, oh, yeah, that's kind of interesting. Yeah. I don't know. Oh, really? You're into that? Wow. Okay. I wouldn't have thought. I didn't really think about that. But yeah, I guess it's a little interesting.
I agree. Most people are out there. They're not looking up in the sky or anything. They're just, doing their job, thinking about their next car or whatever. They don't even think this way.
Here's the thing about it. I'll bet both of you guys have noticed this too. You talk to an ordinary person, just like who's at an average level of interest or disinterest in this, but if you get them for 5 minutes and you just tell them why you think it's so cool, I would say the vast majority of cases, in my experience, people get into it. I cannot even begin to recall the hundreds, and I mean hundreds and hundreds of times, that I've been with people one-on-one and as a private person, and they find out, oh, you're into UFOs. And I say yes. And then like 5 minutes later, they are hooked. They're hooked right. because I'm able very quickly to explain that this is not fun and games, man. This is some serious stuff. And so what happens is they discover that they, unbeknownst to themselves, had a real hunger for truth. They didn't even realize. But when someone shows them, it's like a light bulb goes on above their head and they're like, wow, I had no idea. That's fascinating. And I can actually identify the look. I've seen this on people I've talked to so many times. And it's like I'm almost rolling through another movie again, over and over, rewinding it, like Groundhog Day, Bill Murray, rewinding the same scene over and over with each new person. It's almost like I can predict what's going to happen. And I'm usually right. Like, give me 5 minutes with an ordinary person and I can get them interested in this topic. And I'm sure both of you guys have done the same thing.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of generalized interest that's waiting to be tapped on this topic because it is a fascinating topic. I mean, it's the greatest mystery of our time. It truly is. It's not just explainable in one simple thing or one other. It is complex.
That's the point. I think that so many people miss the boat on. It's not just, in fact, today there's more credence given to the multiplicity, let's say, of the phenomena. It isn't just one thing. The extraterrestrial hypotheses, and again, it is just a hypothesis, and yet we get bashed around. And I get a kick out of it. Don't you, Rich? I mean, you stop and think how much abuse we get when it's just we're putting it forth as a hypothesis. It's crazy. It's crazy. But now the interdimensional component, which is a possibility. The other thing is, of course, like as you mentioned, this technology is probably first engineered, and by now, advanced engineered technology going hand in hand or whatever. But there may be something else that we can't even imagine that's so outside the scope of our imagination. And you use a term that I love because I use it too, other, as far as other possibilities. And that is so true.
These other beings.
Yes, that's better than saying extraterrestrial or putting some sort of predisposed image or thought.
I'm more comfortable with that, with you saying others. They're whatever they are. They're somehow they're not of this civilization. So
they're not my neighbors.
Yeah. The thing about this topic, I know we're probably going to run out of time in about 10 minutes or so, but I mean, what I love, the reason I'm hooked, I think, I mean, I'm just naturally, I have a curious mind. That's just how I am, and I think that's how any of us who are in this field, we have an innate curiosity.
Right.
I have to remind myself that there are a lot of people, you know, they don't really have much of a curiosity. I mean, they're just basically going through their life. They're doing their simple thing. Mm-hmm. They don't need to have philosophical issues resolved. They've got their simple little box of reality. They're in that. It's like a shoebox. Not everyone is that way, though. I'm not that way, and many people are not. So I think it's great to ask questions, and we may get to the bottom of some of these, and we probably won't get to the bottom of a lot of other questions. But honestly, if I just had to go through my life as just doing some regular run-of-the-mill thing and not engage in this issue, I don't know if I could continue. I would have such a hard time. So this is the most engaging thing. It's I feel like the luckiest guy that I know. I mean, I get to do this really full time. I mean, this is my life. It's become my life, and I've thrown myself into it, and I feel like I wake up in the morning. I may not have enough sleep, and I may be tired. I may have too much to do, but I never forget how lucky I am that I get to do this. I get to actually fulfill a passion. At the age that I'm at, it's keeping me going, and it's the best thing.
You know, this is just a part of my life, but it's a very rich part of my life, and I really enjoy it a lot. And, you know, sometimes you get to talking to people, and next thing you know, they're telling you about a sighting when you bring up the topic. I mean, it's really opened a lot of doors, and I really like it. It's been a really fun ride.
These stories are everywhere. That's an amazing thing. They're everywhere. When I first I started researching this back in the 90s, late 90s, and I was so secretive about this. I didn't tell my wife for the entire first year that I was researching this. I mean, and then after I told her, I said, "Don't you dare tell your father." So I wrote my first book almost totally by stealth. The last few months, I started telling people, and that's when I realized that there actually was a lot of interest. And then the stories would start coming in unsolicited. I never asked people for their UFO stories. They just started telling me. And just like with you, Martin, they would tell me these incredible things. I mean, some of these are up close and personal, and they tell no one.
That's
or
right.
Maybe like one friend, or maybe their spouse, or maybe not anyone. And then they tell me because they knew I wouldn't laugh. And I've got hundreds of those stories. I mean, literally hundreds. And they're just, and these mostly were not even reported, and like not even to MUFON or the National UFO Reporting Center. They're just in the mind, in some corner of someone's mind. And what I think is the big tragedy is that think about this. We're dealing with this incredible phenomenon that defies comprehension, that just blows our mind. And what do we do about it? We tell no one. We're dealing with this in an atomized way, which is the worst way possible. What we should be doing is communicating with each other, comparing notes, organizing, and however we want to organize, so that we at least can learn from each other and get emotional support and get some kind of, even a little bit of closure. I mean, as it is, people get nothing. And some people are really traumatized. Some people find it exhilarating, but they're almost very few of them. They can't talk about it at work. They can't talk about it with family. That's just not right. I mean, to me, that's a sign, an innate sign of repression of a society. When you can't talk about something that's that important, that to me is de facto symptom of an oppressive, authoritarian type of society.
Hey, Richard, why don't you give the listener out there how they'd find your website and what speaking engagements you have coming up and all that stuff?
Yeah, my website is richarddolanpress.com. If you forgot that, you could just probably Google the name Richard Dolan, and I think that'd be the top link. I do a lot of, and that site, by the way, has got a lot of information on what I do, and it has information on authors that I publish through Richard Dolan Press. I'm really proud of this, and this is expanding It expanded a lot this last year, and it's going to be expanding a lot more in 2014. So go to there. And speaking engagements, I just went through a flurry of them this last year. I don't have anything lined up for a few months. I am planning, and I've been invited, and it looks like it's a go, to do a 3-week tour of Canada from the east to the west coast, but that's in late May into early June of coming year. So that's not for a while.
Yeah, you really wouldn't want to go there right now.
No way, man. Well, I got a lot of good Canuck friends, but no, I think I'll wait till the weather gets nicer. No, I don't think I have anything. I don't think I've got anything planned until then, at least formally. I'm not going to be at the International UFO Congress, which is the big thing at the end of February. That's in Phoenix.
Right.
I was there last year. I'm not going to be there this year.
You'll be out here in October.
Yes, I will, Sam.
Yes. You didn't forget, did you?
Oh, God, no.
No, it's on the calendar.
And probably sometime before, we'll have to be in touch. I'd like to do something up in Geneva again. That was up in Galena, wasn't it?
Galena.
Nice?
Galena,
yeah.
Galena, Illinois. Oh, that's a beautiful place. That's the former home of Ulysses S. Grant, and I like it for that reason alone. But yeah, Galena's a great place. As far as my own engagements, I have no doubt. I'm not trying to sound overconfident, but I'm sure that I'll have things lined up in the spring. They always.
How about television shows? Television shows. I know you got to.
Oh, okay. So check it out. This was a good one. I'm really excited about this. I shot 8 episodes this last fall of an upcoming show. I think it's going to. I hope it will be almost like the quality of like Ancient Aliens was, and maybe it'll have that impact. It will be on the History Channel. It's called Hangar 1, I believe. And it doesn't deal with ancient UFOs. It deals with contemporary UFO phenomenon with an emphasis on the deep cover-up aspects. This is all stuff that I've lived to talk about, and I gave extensive interviews for this show. I really was very encouraged when I talked to the producers. So that, I think, will be out in early 2014. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, when do you think your book will come out, your next one?
I think next month. I was even trying to get it done before this Christmas. It would be nice to have a new book for the holiday season. But I can't rush it so that I wreck it. I need this to be exactly right. Once it's published, and I don't want to screw this up. So I'm thinking January should not be a problem. A month from now will not be a problem. As I said earlier, I'm really fine-tuning it. There might be 1 or 2 small passages I add to it, but I think I've got this whole thing down now.
Well, that's great. Well,
And
Richard,
that's UFOs for the 21st century mind. I'll just say that.
Well, it's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Richard,
I've enjoyed it.
Fantastic.
Hey, thanks for having
Happy
me on.
holidays, brother.
Yeah.
I intend to enjoy my holiday. My daughter and I just got some eggnog. It's not the natural eggnog, but it's also not the cruddy stuff at the ordinary store. So we got some holiday music in the house, and I'll relax a little bit tonight.
Thank you.
Good night, Richard.
Oh, good night. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to our show, and please remember to check out our website, podcastufo.com, for the latest blogs and forums. We will be back next week. Thanks again, and remember, keep your eyes to the sky.